Is this on? Let's turn this on. And then here's a dongle. Okay. And here's HDMI.
Hello? Hello? No, I'm not interested. Hello.
Hi. I'm Ruth.
Hi, I'm Ruth.
Hello. You're Ruth and I'm Ruth.
That's close. And where are you from, Ruth?
I'm the founder of Bloom Asia. Yeah, so yeah, it's Nari was up there speaking on the first day. That's one of our girls. Yeah.
Wonderful. And you, where do you stay?
I lived for the last 12 years in Phnom Penh, and I've just moved back to Brisbane.
Oh.
Yeah, and I do 2 days a week with Bloom, and I do 2 days a week with sex trafficking survivors in Australia. So I'm a psychotherapist, and I do really, if you come to my session tomorrow, really cutting edge work within the amygdala that changes memories.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
Have
and
you
then
met
one
them?
day lecturing.
Okay. Where?
At Queensland University in trauma.
Queensland.
Yeah,
Oh, I have a
Queensland. I'm a Queensland girl.
I have a colleague who's doing a PhD there, in fact.
She's doing a beach.
A PhD.
PhD? Oh, really? Yeah, they're really quite advanced in the neuroscience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm amazed that you've heard of it. Most people have only heard of Sydney and Melbourne. They never hear of Queensland.
Queensland? No, it's quite Brisbane. I have quite a few friends there, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I looked up your information, and I looked up the information about Tori. I love the meaning. The gate between the sacred and the mundane. How beautiful is that? You said a lot about who you must be.
Oops. Hi.
Hello, are you Tanomi?
Yes, I am.
Hi Tanomi, I'm Ruth Lowell, the founder of Bloom Asia.
Hi.
Yes.
Bloom Asia.
Bloom Asia.
Okay. Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice-
Finally.
Oh, that's nice.
How have you been?
Wonderful. I've always enjoyed catching up with everybody
Oh,
and
really?
seeing.
I'm
Yeah.
feeling very overwhelmed with the numbers of the people I'm meeting.
Yes, it's true. I may have not gone to the last session and had a little self-care.
Me too. I had a very bad headache. I think the conference room was just so cold.
Yeah.
And I'm
okay.
tired of, hi, how are you? Etc. etc. I decided to go back to my room and take a long bath.
Yeah, oh, that's perfect. Perfect self-care.
I was simply with my
Okay. Maybe I should sit over back there and sit front. You might pull my hair. Like school. I was just telling a group, I looked up the meaning of Tori, and it was so beautiful. The gateway from the mundane to the sacred.
Right.
How lovely is that?
Oh, thank you. And how did you get to know about the
I was looking up Ichika and their organisation, and then my organisation had heard about heard about you, so I think I contacted. I don't know.
Blue, sorry, you're from the Bloom Asia. Where did I come up
I
with?
don't know. Maybe Emma Hall? Yeah.
You always see
No, I lived in Cambodia for the last 15 years, and now I'm back in Australia.
Welcome.
Yeah. So I travel back and forth. I'm still.
So I think I should get started by now, or should I wait for a couple of more minutes?
And I'm just doing clinical
Not very
supervision
sure.
and working. So I'm working with survivors. Yes, I am. And I specialise in sex trafficking survivors in Australia. And,
I'm really interested in learning more. His is also the clinical psychologist.
yeah, Uma Chatri, yeah, I really enjoyed going to her session. So I'm doing really cutting edge neuroscience around working with the amygdala and updating memories without having to go back, and updating unconscious core beliefs without having to go back using
Okay, so let's begin with a little bit a one-liner for everybody from here. What brings you to this session? What made you choose this session?
Somebody said I should come to this one, not the other one. It's me.
Anyone else? And you have no idea why the person said so.
I sort of do. I won't say it though.
Okay. Anybody else?
I was going to Laura's and she's not here because I always go to the trauma ones, and then I looked up all the people and what you do and thought this sounded really interesting.
I'm interested in how the survivor and NGO and donor that how they can come together.
Okay. So before I get into the session, a little bit of introduction of mine. I've been working in the sector for a long time now, but my area of interest has always been collaboration. So from 2003 onwards, I started working in programs which was largely about bringing NGOs together and facilitating partnerships. So prior to that, I had started working with a grassroots NGO that used to work with survivors of sex trafficking, shelters and red light areas and brothels. So that was my grounding of my real work with survivors for the first 3 or 4 years before I moved on to working in philanthropies and intermediary organizations. And one of the things I've often felt during my early years of work is when we talk about participation and the whole idea of child participation in those days, Roger Hart's ladder was really upcoming and everybody was talking about it, but different people meant very different things in terms of when they talked about participation. For example, back in the day, I'm talking about the late 90s, early 2000s, if a child was found to be HIV positive and was institutionalized for care, and the state, the governments would very often not allow the child to go back home because of its fear that if it was a girl, if it was a young woman, then the parents would get them married off to somebody. And at that time, if you remember, the HIV/AIDS was a big scare. And it was very strange because the organizations I worked in, I wondered that why when the child would ask that why can't I go back home, they would say that it's a judicial order, it's a government order. And when I would ask the caseworkers that why is it the organization, why aren't we taking any action? Why aren't we challenging the judicial orders? The NGO would say that we cannot get into an adversarial relationship with the government because then we will not be able to exist and they will not allow us to run the shelters. The government sees us largely as a support wing of its own that would help the social welfare department. But if we started challenging the government orders, then the collaboration would break down. But it always
We're talking in India, right? Specifically.
we were talking about in India, Nepal, Bangladesh.
Right. Just so I could get context.
Yeah. And this role of the NGO was not something that the funders necessarily challenged either. So nobody was really questioning that if the NGO is a custodian of the child or the young person, the trafficked survivor, is the NGO's job to act in best interests of the survivor. On paper, yes, but in practice, very often it is much more complicated than that. So there were many, many questions around the whole power inequity that works in the ecosystem between the government and NGOs and funders and the community, very often children or the youth. And that's been one of my areas of interest, of study and work. So in the last 12 years ago, I was reading reports by then. I had just finished a 10-year stint of working in a French organization that worked in Asia, and I could see reports about how survivors were coming back home, and the traffickers from the source areas, the sending areas from where they were trafficked, had not been indicted in the prosecution cases in the states from where they were rescued. Because like somebody said this morning, law enforcement is bound by jurisdiction. So even in South Asia, if a person was to be rescued in India and the person was going back to Bangladesh, India would make no attempts at prosecuting the trafficker in Bangladesh, and neither is there a legal or a judicial mechanism that actually helps harmonize the laws and the policies of the two countries. But that's between two countries. But even if I look at India as a whole, it is a large country and each of the states are almost like a country unto themselves. The law enforcement is just as fragmented. So survivors were coming back home, and the traffickers had not been even prosecuted, which seemed like one of the crimes with the highest degree of impunity. And so naturally, as a donor, we had at that point of time suggested, well, if they would like to prosecute the traffickers, for sure we'll make funds available. And the NGOs came back and said that when they spoke to the survivors, they said that they were willing to cooperate with the prosecution only if there were rehabilitation services, which sounded very strange to me. The fact that they would ask for rehabilitation services or reintegration services was a very normal ask, but the fact that they would make the prosecution conditional to it seemed a little strange, because if I'm a victim of a crime and my perpetrator was roaming around free, intimidating me, threatening me perhaps, or stigmatizing me, it seemed like almost natural justice that this person would wish to do something about it. But when the NGO puts the offer on the table, for that person to then say, well, I will do this for you only if you give me rehabilitation services, something was incredibly wrong in there. So that's when we really started asking that the entire justice mechanism as it operates, who does it really serve? So as a starting point, we actually started asking survivors, got them together, mobilized and organized them, and all NGOs that at that point of time, all NGOs working in rescue, in rehabilitation, in repatriation around the room, and said that what would justice really mean to you? And they started questioning some very, very basic fundamentals. Very basic fundamentals. Thank you, Tony. And they were asking that if I'm the victim and I'm being rescued and being put into a shelter home, then how is that justice? Yeah? If I'm the one who's being withheld in that shelter home, because until the trial comes up in the court, that I will have to be held for the trial, and that means years of my adolescence and my youth, my education that I can receive as a non-formal education or vocational training that I receive is not mainstream. It doesn't build my employability, and I'm incarcerated. My communication, my access to the world outside is controlled. Then how is it justice for me?
Like another prison.
So the idea was, but then if you look at it, that the NGO who was running the shelter home had its own set of compulsions. It was running these shelters. It was working. The idea of closed institutions is one that is decided by the law. So if the court is giving the custody of the survivor to the NGO, then it is the NGO's job to ensure that this person doesn't leave the premises or just doesn't go and disappear. Many of these survivors were adults. They may have been children when they were trafficked, but by the time they were rescued, many of them were adults. So technically, they were people of their own age, with agency. However, they were being treated as people with diminished capacities of decision making. So they were incarcerated in the shelter homes for a minimum of 3 years, running up till 10 years sometimes. And when they would eventually be sent back home and repatriated, then they would be done under conditions of anonymity, and the NGOs would take great care, supposedly, saying that nobody must get to know that she was a victim of trafficking, which basically then prevented her from any options of filing any cases to the local police stations once she's back home against the traffickers who have not been prosecuted. Even if she were to file for compensation under the state laws, she would have to file a complaint with the police that actually proved that she was claiming to be a victim of violence. Oh, you want me to use it? Am I not loud enough?
Because the
okay.
speaker,
All right.
I mean,
Yeah, okay. So this was the situation, and in 2012, we therefore created and I was working as a consultant. I was brought in, my firm was brought in to play the role of the backbone agency. The group consisted of the funder, of NGOs, and of survivors. And by which point of time, actually, technology had come in, and we had WhatsApp groups, etc., which made it possible for very complex communications to be had between organizations and survivors who were otherwise dispersed in a very wide geographical area. And the whole idea was that we must try and create an integrated case management system that looked at the person in the center and every other service and law around it, and limitations that each actor, be it the NGO, be it the survivor, be it the lawyer, anybody who was experiencing any limitation by law, we would find out ways of challenging that. So for example, if an NGO working in the destination area says that I run a shelter home, it is supposed to be a custodial shelter home, it's a closed institution, it's not in my power to challenge that, and I do not really have the power to challenge the court for its decision on institutionalization, then the program would find out ways of somebody else doing it and providing legal counsel to the survivor independently, perhaps a parent, so as to challenge the system in ways that wasn't necessarily going to threaten the identity of the various players. Yeah? Have I given you a brief idea? We were talking about a total of about 12 NGOs. We were talking about a group of lawyers, almost about 10, working in West Bengal and Maharashtra, which are two extreme states of India. And this is a very, very strong corridor, because Maharashtra, where there is Mumbai, is a financial capital of the state, huge prostitution business, sex trade, and West Bengal, which has been economically depressed for the last 50 years, had been a high migration state and high rates of trafficking. So this is an infrastructure. Now, so in such a situation, when we ask survivors, talking about, all right, let's be at the same table, let's do this together, from program design to program implementation to program monitoring, what does it actually mean? And there have been several things that have worked very well, several challenges. I'm going to talk about 3 specific case studies and situations to talk about the dynamic between the funders, the NGOs, and the survivors, and how it can be complex and how we navigated through it. Okay? Let me start giving you each of the 3 case studies first. So this is the situation number 1. You have it on your phone if you want to look it up there. So this is a survivor who had come back home. She had filed a case against the perpetrator. The perpetrator was a very close relative of hers. She, somewhere down the line, the perpetrator may have apologized. We don't know. This young woman suddenly says, I do not wish to pursue my case against, I wish to withdraw, and it's my decision. So the local NGO who was providing services, naturally initially got very upset because it saw it almost like a sense of betrayal, saying that we've worked so hard to get the litigation up to this stage. This guy naturally wants to compromise because he's a threat of being convicted. And now if you withdraw, it's, this is how the NGO felt. It didn't necessarily communicate all of this to the survivor, but this is how the NGO felt, saying that this is a betrayal and you're thinking only for yourself, because this person, if allowed to go scot-free, is going to traffic other girls and young women. However, the NGO was, helpless. It didn't really have a choice in the matter. The problem was that this survivor had also applied for compensation. And when you apply for compensation, then you have to have had filed a case against a perpetrator saying that, well, I was trafficked. If you withdraw the case, while the compensation in itself is not, does not depend on the conviction of the case, but in order to tell the state that, hey, I deserve compensation under the law because I was a victim of trafficking, I must have filed a case. If she were now to withdraw her primary complaint, then she doesn't, she cannot pursue her compensation anymore. All right? So, this was the dilemma. And the funder and others in the consortium were in a very, they were in a difficult situation to decide that what should we do? Should we pursue the matter in terms of why was she withdrawing? What was really happening in the family? Was there any coercion involved? They had done that at a primary level, but she had almost stonewalled them when she said that, look, it's my choice and I do not wish to pursue the case. So they knew that something has been happening in the family, probably, but she wasn't letting them in. My question to each of you, if you were in a situation as the NGO over there, what would you do?
Can I comment? Well, compensation is depend on.
Yeah, you need the mic.
I just want to clarify here. There are type of compensation scheme, right?
Right.
So trafficker called restitution, which of course you cannot ask the trafficker to pay such restitution if the court is not happening, right, and not convicted. But there are also state-funded compensation, and there are also in Thailand, for example, there are tip fund.
Mm-hmm.
You do not need to go to court to get the tip fund through the MSTSS.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that you can still.
Yes, but the survivor must identify saying that I'm a victim
Yes,
of trafficking.
there is a multidisciplinary team
Right.
which is like conducting the victim identification
Right.
to confirm whether this individual is potential victim of trafficking or not. If
Right.
they are identified by multidisciplinary team in Thailand,
Right.
then they can be referred to MSTSS for support and services. If they're willing to press charge, of course they can get those restitution or even the state-funded compensation through the legal system.
Right.
But there are also tip fund that can be provided to them
Right.
without this individual go to the court.
And if this person is unwilling to say that I'm a victim of trafficking, then?
Of course, yeah, that's different thing.
We deal with that all the time,
Constantly.
and we have to just be there ready.
Yes.
We deal with that all the time at Bloom, and we just have to be there ready when the girl wants to come back or to pursue and make sure that we're connected. She's in the alumni group, she has peer support, etc.
So at that point of time, you just let go and you go by her choice and her decision.
After
warning her of the dangers.
Right.
Yes, I just want to clarify it because that the condition from each country, like Professor Nurul mentioned differently. For Cambodia, compensation not happened at the beginning. It happened after the criminal justice announcement from the court first, and then another complaining to that compensation, civil compensation. So that here, may you clarify that survivor involved with NGO at the beginning. So NGO at the beginning, they already happened by providing lawyer, legal assistant, everything already done. before she withdrawal, it must have the reason. So these case studies are very short, and you ask us that what we do is not possible to answer the right question to you, correct?
So just elaborate. Imagine, think of a similar case that you may have experienced, and how have you navigated?
Okay, so can I stand up? Okay.
Yes, of course.
Just only, I'm Kosal from Chapai Coalition Cambodia, and we experienced this perfectly about civil compensation. In the case in Cambodia, also right now we raised our joint hand together with other 50 NGO together. We say that here, joint hand for advocacy to change the compensation, civil compensation. In Cambodia, the court proceeds at the tribunal first. So in the tribunal statement from the court, they said that the perpetrator can arrest and in the jail for 7 years and a 2 million real on the paper. In this stage, without any another claiming that we call civil compensation, claiming the second to the civil court that our victim do not have any opportunity to get this compensation. This is that we do not want to, because it's respond to his question, we have to analyze the context. In Cambodia, the court system, we have two. One, criminal court, second is civil court. So in criminal court, the perpetrator were judged that, hey, you are in the jail for 10 years and you have to pay to the victim for 10 millions. But 10 million on the paper. They require the victim to investigate about the wealth of the property of the perpetrators. At this case, how our survivor can access it without any support from the legal assistance from NGO or from a freelance or something like that one. I don't know exactly in his study have another NGO working for holistic like this from the criminal court to the civil court. You got what I mean?
So you're linking the compensation to the conviction of the trafficker.
Yes.
Right. In this particular case, in the case of India, it is not linked. A person who's a survivor of trafficking can claim compensation from the state, regardless of whether the trafficker gets convicted or not.
Then I told you only you can answer this.
Yeah, I'm giving you the context, I'm giving you the situation, and if you were in this situation, what would your action be? What would your choices be?
Okay, can I answer this question?
You can sit down. You can sit down. It's fine. We can hear you.
Okay. If I am in that condition like he asks, what we have to do as NGO? Sorry.
What would you do?
We are NGO in this condition, right?
Right.
Only one that we have to provide consultation, legal assistance to the survivor. A very important role.
Yeah. So you've given her the legal assistance. You've provided her the consultation. She says, I do not wish to pursue the case against the trafficker, and if that should threaten my should threaten my compensation claim.
Yes.
She doesn't want to give up the compensation, but she's saying, she's very sure that she doesn't want to prosecute, but she's, it means the consequences that she cannot avail the compensation.
I will ask her to go to India.
Anything that she doesn't want to get it, right?
Yes.
So that, listen to me, everyone, survivor have right to decline everything.
Yeah.
We have no right to force her to do
Yes.
anything, right? Respect her right, respect her review after
Thank
we
you, sir.
provide enough assistance.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
I understand your position. Anybody else?
Hello, I'm Sophie from Cambodia. I just say a little bit about the experience to support survivor.
Can you just tell me?
Yeah.
Can you tell me if you were in the position of the social worker, what would your response be?
We will respect the decision of survivor and we still support our service, what they need from other beside the legal.
Thank you. Right. Let me get to the next situation.
You're not going to tell us the answer?
I'll get back.
Oh, give us credit.
Patience, hold your horses.
Do you have different color? Because
All
it's
right.
difficult
Now, when survivors have to claim for compensation, she has a complaint against the police, which she primarily uses saying that, well, I'm a survivor of trafficking, and therefore I claim compensation. The Legal Services Authority from the government will then look for multiple verifications to ensure that her claim is valid. So they would look for papers around, the date she was rescued, any documentation of her repatriation, any documentation of her medical reports. So they look for corroborative evidence that substantiates her claim. The better your documentation, needless to say, the better your chances of getting compensation, and compensation fairly. But in the system, as we see that very often survivors actually have no papers with them. The papers all lie in the system with NGOs, with governments, and the documentation is sometimes very poor. In certain cases, a survivor may have just run away from the brothel without a formal rescue in process. In certain cases, they may have taken help of a client to have escaped from that situation. So in those particular cases, the documentation is even weaker. Now, out of 100 of such cases, a good percentage, around 30 to 40% of them, have weak documentation. The balance 60% have moderate to good documentation. When these cases were then taken to the lawyers' first reaction was that the ones with better documentation, let's work for those, because we have a better chance of winning those cases and then surviving, helping the survivors. The ones which have weak documentation, it would be a waste of time and resources and energy, because they will never see the light of the day. She will never be able to convince the Legal Services Authority that she had been a survivor, and in which case the chances of them getting compensation is nil. Yes.
Can I comment?
Yes.
Well, probably again, this is really depend on the country context.
Right.
Like for example, in Indonesia, if you wanted a compensations, but say you don't have any evidentials with you and you run away, escape, or rescue, and kind of that, we have in Indonesia what we call victim, support agency, LPSK, victim witness agency. So this victim witness agency is mandated by the state. It's a state kind of body where they can help the victim to help calculate the compensation. So what will be the basis of cost evidence? With lack of evidence, what this agency can do is
Can I
they will.
interrupt you for a minute?
Yes.
We're not discussing the law over here.
Yeah, but
We're
I was-
discussing ethics. We're discussing ethics because the government will have one set of ethics, the NGOs will have one set of ethics, the funder will have one set of ethics, and the survivor will have her own set of ethics. The issue over here is not to now get into court in what is the law in Cambodia versus Vietnam versus Thailand. The issue is that when you are dealing with multiple polarities, how do you balance? Right? So in the first situation, for example, you've clearly taken a position saying that my decision is with my choice is to support that individual survivor, because it must be her choice, her decision. In other words, you're making another choice, saying that if that should mean that this particular perpetrator should be allowed not to be prosecuted by the state will not agree with you, right? So you're making a choice. It's not about right or wrong. You're making a choice based on what is the nature of your vocation.
But in order to help people, you also need to understand the system, mechanism, and the laws.
That's correct. But again, if you were a police officer, for instance, whose job is to ensure that a person who has committed a crime must be brought onto the service of the law. For that person to say that I am not going to be driven by, I know this person is perpetrating this crime, but if the survivor has said no, for the law enforcement agency to work under that principle doesn't work. Yeah, as a system. So all I'm saying is that as NGOs, as activists, we have a commitment to go by the principle of the survivor has a right choice. But there will be other motivations, other principles in the system that one has to balance. For example, in this particular case, for instance, the issue is not, forget for a minute that you come from whichever country you come from. The issue is not about what is the law in your particular country. The issue over here is that the survivors have, a set of survivors have poor documentation, which would mean that if they claim for compensation, they would not avail compensation. The lawyer is saying that if I have to judiciously spend my time and resources, why would I make so much of effort pursuing 40% of the cases which are not going to result in the survivor getting any compensation? So she doesn't benefit from it. The lawyers don't benefit from it. Nobody in the system benefits from it. So what would be the choice? What would be the reason for us to pursue those 40% of those cases? Was what the lawyers were saying. The survivors who still wanted to file for compensation, because she's also seeing other peers of hers getting compensation money, and that's quite substantive. The local NGO decides that, all right, if the private lawyers are saying that they do not wish to fight for these cases because they don't seem to be strong cases, let us get the government legal aid services and let the government provide the lawyers to represent these survivors. Am I making sense? Yeah? Now what happens is when the government, you get a lawyer from the legal services authority from the government, it's a sure shot failure, because they will never ever pursue these cases beyond a cursory level, and if that means they have poor documentation, they will have no compunction in letting her loose. The funder says this is like a setup. You know, we're all posturing. If these survivors are led to the government-appointed lawyers, knowing fully well that the chances of these cases being won is practically nil, then it seems like we're doing something because it's in the checklist, but not because it is actually meaningful. You see the point? Any thoughts?
Having sat with many girls in the courtroom, IJM was always asking us to advocate on their behalf to get them to go to court. And as their psychotherapist, from their trauma level, knowing they will regress 6 months, 12 months in any healing, they don't want to be there. But I'm interested to see where you're going to go ethically, you know. But I have to say, do you want to do this? Do you have the resilience? Do you have the fortitude to be called a slut in a war and whatever? We work all through that, and it's a different an opinion.
You're talking about the first case?
No, I'm just talking in general about receiving compensation.
Over here, it is not about
costs to receive compensation mentally.
Right. So in this particular case, let's say, for example, if I'm the donor and I'm seeing that the survivors are being led to the government-appointed lawyers, I know for sure that they're not going to get compensation. They're going to spend about 6 months to a year making multiple trips to the offices, appearing for interviews, only to be rejected. And I know this is going to happen. And as a funder, I don't know, it feels like that I'm setting them up. I know what the result is going to be, but I'm just posturing and saying that, look, we've made the efforts, we've helped you file for the complaints, and it is the government who has refused your claims. And I'm doing so, I'm taking away their time, their heartbreak, they're getting their hopes up, but I'm just playing by the book. And that's where the funder challenges the NGO in saying, how can this be an ethical situation? The NGO says, what can I do? The private lawyers won't file for their cases. The only choice I have is the government lawyers. Yes.
Surely the NGO and the funder have to be on point with respect of what's in the best interest of the child, particularly the survivor, the survivor.
Yeah.
And they need to have a framework by which they make that decision, and then inform the survivor based off both their contribution and their own assessment. This is how we've come to this resolution in the best interest of the survivor. That doesn't seem like a radical thought to me, but I can understand the conundrum depending on whether or not the NGO, the funder, and other stakeholders have a shared outcome.
Right. Have you ever come across any situation, either in your family or workplace or any other group, where people always have shared frameworks of resolution?
We do, with our funders. We wouldn't let them dictate.
You agree on, in the best of partnerships, you agree on 9 out of 10 things, but there will always be that one thing where you have different ways of looking at things.
Is that not the funder micromanaging that sort of thing then?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. I mean, take this case for example. It's not that the funder is blaming the NGO, but is saying that how can this be possibly the best situation? I'll come to what actually happened. Yeah?
Okay. Good. You've been keeping my horses.
This is the last one. This is the last one. So there were these two organizations working in the same consortium, and they've had bad blood from before. So one of the survivors from one of the NGOs makes an allegation towards the another NGO, saying that this organization has willfully and deliberately disclosed my identity, my past as a trafficked survivor, into my community and to my extended family, which has caused me great distress, and therefore demanded for the expulsion of the NGOI. Yeah? The consortium appointed a committee. There was already a committee. Out of the committee, there were 3 people, including the lawyer, a social worker, and a manager. It was an investigation team. They went, they investigated, they talked to the multiple stakeholders, and they came up with no conclusive evidence. And they presented the report to both the NGOs and saying that, well, there are 2 things. One is that we found no evidence of it, and the survivor was greatly, she was very, very upset. The entire collective, the survivors collective of that NGO, was enraged that here you talk about survivors, in our best interest and our agency, and this is all for us, etc., etc. But in practice, she challenged the authority of this committee and said that you are actually taking no action. So in some ways, you are complicit with the perpetrator. And the other NGO had, constantly kept on saying that I haven't done it. They're just making a false allegation, and they're using the young women to make this allegation.
What a mess.
Any thoughts? And in all of these situations, everybody eventually would look up to the funder and want the funder to take a decision and take the role of the judge in saying that, well, you're the one who has the power of the money and you have the power to stop the funding. And the funder kept on saying, look, in this consortium, we are all members, we all bring different resources. I bring in funding, that's my role. But that doesn't mean that I'm an arbitrator or a judge for this group. Yeah? But it didn't mean that the funder would be let off the hook. Have you ever come across any such situation? Never. All right. So here is the first one. Are you also finding it green?
Yes. Can't read it.
I thought it was my eyesight.
You need to push your cable in. Make sure your cable's connected correctly.
It was white before and then.
Oh, we get the answers.
So one of the things is that you already know that where the perpetrator happens to be a family relative, a boyfriend or a husband, and this person is going back to the situation, you already know the kind of coercion that is likely to happen in such situations. In a lot of the focus around rehabilitation, reintegration is very often around vocational training, livelihoods, but there is very little resources that is available and accessible around mental health. The caseworkers in rural parts of Asia very often do not have they're not with the technical expertise or the education, and are also guided by their own moral judgments very often. In such a situation, if there isn't enough of a investment that is made for reintegration and empowering these community-based organizations to be able to deal with situations and preempt and take measures adequately, this is likely to happen. But this becomes even more frustrating when the NGO starts working with each individual case in an isolated way. The solution became much easier when all the survivors were collectivized and the problem was presented to them without necessarily looking at an individual person. So you're not waiting for a situation to occur, to emerge, to then find solutions, but when survivors get together and you can preempt these situations are likely to happen, you start to get them to have conversations about what are some of the challenges that survivors after coming back home will face in pursuing prosecution, especially when it also happens that the family becomes a victim of shame by the neighborhood. So very often the family would turn around and say that there's no need to get into this litigation anymore because it brings even greater shame and distress to the family. Let's just get you off married and let's just forget all of this to happen. If it happens to be a family, a relative, a brother-in-law, or a husband, etc., she will be under tremendous pressure to forgive and accept. So what do you do? And there was no short-term solution. So the short-term solution was, as all of you said at that point of time, there is nothing to be done other than just going on with her, with whatever she chooses and decides. But a longer-term solution becomes when it is collectivized, so that when a particular survivor is experiencing that kind of coercion back at home, because it's been a body of work with survivors collectives, it's not an isolated problem. It is not overwhelming for oneself, because one knows that there are 5 other people in my group who are going through a similar situation, and that's what gives them both strength and strategies of coping with it. Even then, we know that not in every case will it succeed. There will be some people who will just not agree to prosecute. But this dialogue that has to happen between the survivor, the social worker, the lawyer, the funder, and the NGO has to happen, where the survivor also gets to hear what are some of the other points of concern. And this has to be done in a way as not to induce guilt, not to induce a thing of coercion, of the survivor feeling that everybody is now telling me what to do. It has to be a facilitated dialogue where the person is making a choice, a decision, knowing fully well that how does it impact me and how does it impact others. For example, if a particular social worker is going through a lot of frustration that 5 out of 10 of his or her clients are withdrawing the cases midway or compromising out of courts for whatever reason, how does it impact the mental health of that social worker is also a point of concern and a point of discussion. It's not that she has to take responsibility for it, but the dialogue must be had. If a particular funder, who again has back-end donors, who is funding the program, has to report back to its back-end donors saying that 50% of survivors have chosen to withdraw their cases, this is a community of people who's probably in another country, another state, another culture altogether, who will find it very difficult to imagine that what could have resulted back in the data. And therefore, it is important for the funder to also participate in the discussion, to talk about how does some of these decisions, some of these statistics impact their organization and how does it make them feel. The reason I talk about bridges is because this is a bridge of communication that is never ever had. Talking about the mess, about the complexity, that there are no easy answers, and every choice that a person takes has also another set of implications. This is especially, we wouldn't advocate this for a population of 12 years old and 13-year-olds, but when somebody is working with a youth population, and especially if the person is getting into leadership positions, because then the person is going and talking about policy and law and becomes an advocate in the community to other people, the person has to learn how to deal with complexity, and what better way of understanding that other than through one's own life. So when we talk about people with lived experiences, it's a great opportunity when people with lived experiences navigate through the complexity with a certain degree of consciousness. The choices I have made, choices I have not made but were made on my behalf, how has it impacted me and how has it impacted others? So one of the ways of enabling people move from victimhood to survivorhood to leadership is about working with empathy. Because when we have been through victimhood, our energies are always inward looking. Yeah? It's because there's so much of pain within that all our energies are guided towards looking at that pain and feeling healed by the pain. But as we heal, we must also find ways of learning how to empathize with others, especially when those others are not necessarily in agreement with me. So I think it was Sintechi who brought this issue up, that as you move up ladders in the power and hierarchy of systems, the situations get so much more complex that just one's lived experiences of victimhood is not enough. And unless and until the person has a certain maturity of being able to empathize with systems and role holders, one of the markers of a stuck victimhood becomes when everybody becomes a villain and I'm the victim. The government is a villain, the lawyer is a villain, the courts are villains, the traffickers are villains, of course. So everybody's a villain, and if you are not sympathizing with me, then you're a villain. This is a marker of victimhood, and this journey is, it cannot happen through trainings alone. It has to have also from the way the person has experienced the social works services. Yeah? When we face this with this conundrum, and we as a group deliberated, then what do we do? Yeah, because there doesn't seem to be any solution. Even when we negotiated with the private lawyers, he said that it's not in my power. Even if I fight for these cases, I'm not going to win. What then we decided to do as a consortium was to file for these cases, let these cases go up to the court, let them get rejected, but it became a huge body of data to move into advocacy with the government, saying that these are the demands that the Legal Services Authority makes while looking at a compensation claim, and how unrealistic they are for a large number of survivors and why. So when the collective data, of course, it didn't meet with a short-term objective of getting them compensation, but it didn't die down either. It wasn't as if to say, oh, well, your case doesn't have adequate documentation, so suck it up and nothing can be done. It then gave them another body of information, data, and evidence for them to move it up. And I don't know if all of you are familiar. Some of the survivors over here have, who've come from India. They have a federation, a national federation called ILFA, or Policy Engagement. So then the entire issue moved up to the policy engagement at the central level, saying that this is a fundamental problem and we need to look at the change in the policy and the law. It still hasn't found the light of the day, but it's up there for discussion. It's not a hidden issue. That process of negotiation and fight, even sometimes if it doesn't result in the desired outcome for the survivor, it gives a sense of camaraderie, a sense of hope. That I have not been deceived, I have not been abandoned, I have not been told that your case is not good enough, therefore you are not entitled to compensation, but there is a pathway. Maybe I will lose, but I will not lose without a fight. And that's what's very important. But this decision wasn't an easy one. I cannot tell you, when you have a WhatsApp groups of people speaking in multiple different languages, with ages of maybe 18 to 55 or 60, with varying levels of education, with lawyers for whom, and these are regular practicing lawyers, so the whole practice of communicating so much on WhatsApp and giving voice notes and updates and having arguments, it's something that nobody ever does for their regular clients. And so it creates enormous frustrations, it creates enormous resistance, and one has to navigate through those emotional complexities and heightened conversations sometimes to be able to find a pathway to move. That how do we therefore move from here? For such programs, therefore, the emotional infrastructure, this is out of our learning actually. If you had asked me that if I had to do it all over again, what would we have done differently? I think from day one we started with a task. This is the issue, these are the actors, what each of us must do. What we didn't adequately spend time on is building of trust and building of understanding the value of each person, that just because somebody doesn't agree with me doesn't mean that somebody's my enemy. People's emotional maturities are always not the same. So to be able to navigate through those messes, it is a huge need to build emotional infrastructure in that group before jumping into something like this. You've turned green again, is it?
Yes, the green gremlin.
And we seem to be stuck. Like I said, this was for the third situation as well. It wasn't an easy one, because when two organizations have such animosity, there is a complete and many of you in your responses to the poll have said that there must be a dialogue. So Tomomi over here, she actually facilitated 3 levels of conversation with Organization X, talking about what does it mean to work in a system where many actors in the system will be your adversary. For example, for those of us who work in this sector, we are often dealing with people, with police officers who we know are corrupt, right? We are often dealing with judges who are bloody insensitive. We're dealing with politicians who have made the most outrageous remarks that are extremely misogynistic, extremely racist. Things like they would say, for example, these girls don't go out of compulsion, they go out of habit. So when you're working with people like that, one of the needs of the job is to learn how do I work with somebody who I may experience intense dislike for and very low levels of mistrust, and how do I engage in dialogue. Easier said than done. Sometimes some partners will refuse to budge. So in this particular case, the dialogue didn't lead to any resolution. Organization X refused to get into a dialogue. And then it became fell up to the consortium. Then what do we do? Because the consortium felt being held emotionally hostage by one organization. The consortium also felt extreme dilemma, because you don't know whether the disclosure has happened or not happened. And it became impossible for anybody to take any position and move. And this is also a reality of running consortiums, that sometimes not every difficult situation will find a solution. But this is why am I bringing this up in a topic on survivors' leadership? Because one of the things that we see is that in this particular case, for Organization X, the group of survivors who have been, there is such a strong sense of loyalty and gratitude that this is the organization which has helped us. And therefore, any enemy of this organization is my enemy. For anybody who's worked in mental health and social work, you will see that how in adolescence this is so common as children, that any enemy of my parents is also my enemy. That you're unable to dissociate yourself from your authority figure, whether it is a parent, sometimes a caregiver, the NGO, and survivors are not immune to manipulation. Yeah? And how do you therefore deal with such situations? So you had the code of collaboration, you had conflict mediation cells, you had accountability committee with rotating membership. Everything was done by the book. X refused to budge. Yeah? So these were some of the insights that this program has brought up for all the organizations. The first is about that survivors leadership requires structures that honor complexity. I think somebody talked about we must have a framework for resolution. Now, the minute you create framework and you create SOPs and you create protocols, you're giving a Bible for others to follow. So that people get into using a rule book for compliance. But that's not what leadership is about. Leadership is having to develop that framework and that rule book for yourself as a collective. And that's a very complex process. Yeah? The second one is about the participation having the right to fail. Many a time when these actions were taken, there were ideas, there were speculations. For instance, let's let that 40% of the survivors with weak documentation, let them file, let them get rejected, let us appeal in the high courts, let that get rejected, and then this becomes a body of evidence for advocacy, and how do we strategize that? And despite doing all of it, out of the current political climate, the agenda really hasn't moved much in the central government. So yes, from an outcome and impact level, somebody would say if the objective was that 100% of survivors would get compensation, it's a failure. From an outcome level, however, the 200 survivors who have participated in that process of engaging with the state and the right to protest, the right to challenge, and the right to looking at the government straight in the face and saying that your policies are unfair.
And that's post-traumatic growth.
That's post-traumatic. That's post-traumatic growth. So who decides failure and what's the paradigm for failure? And even if so, the funder may have, the NGO may have actually its logical framework, may have predicted that X number of cases will find compensation. So by that framework, it would then turn out to be the evaluators who would come and say that, well, it has not been achieved. But how do we argue for the right to failure while working in a system that's so complex? And at that point of time, how do we prioritize the survivors' empowerment being the actual goal of the program instead of those other metrics? The third is about the survivors' leadership is not immune to organizational politics. I think it was yesterday I think somebody has raised a question about how do you protect a survivor's space like Arsan. When you have survivors and allies, how do you navigate through issues of politics? How do you navigate through issues of, those were not their words, but I thought it was a very useful question. How do you navigate through issues of loyalty? How do deal with issues of affiliation? People, even survivors collectives are not immune to any of these things. So when we have a leadership development program, to be aware that these conversations must be had, these negotiations must be had. That's the other thing, and therefore spaces and processes are very important to create for those kinds of things. And the last is about how survivors' participation is a political act, because survivors' participation in leadership is not only about challenging structural authorities of governments, judiciary, law enforcement, or traffickers. The first hit at power equity will actually happen with the NGOs and with the immediate stakeholders, including the donors. And we have to be open to feeling accused. Anybody running a survivors leadership program who says that they have not been accused by the survivors, I would have grave doubts about the authenticity of that program. Let's stop over there. Happy to take questions.
There's a few questions online. So the first one, in your experience, what are the 3 key barriers to donor, NGO, and survivor collaboration?
One of the key barriers I have heard when donors say that I don't want to enter the room because if I enter the room, then it creates it disturbs the hierarchy because I have such power. So if I stay away from the room, then the NGOs and survivors and the communities have a better negotiating thing. I think it's a big fallacy, because just by absentia, the power of the funder or the donor doesn't go away. I think it's in this particular program I have learned, it's a hugely courageous step for a funder to say that I'm also going to be in the room and I'm able to navigate the power inequity and the hierarchy between the funder, the NGO, and the survivors together. So that's one barrier when funders say that I don't want to involve myself in the mess. The second barrier is when the NGOs are unwilling. Very often you hear NGOs talking about these are my girls, these are my boys. It's a big red flag, because it's about if somebody is operating from that degree of protectionism, there is no cooperation. There will be a lot of manipulation of the survivors by those organizations, willingly or unwillingly.
It depends on their emotional maturity, whether they're coming from true self and realizing a part of them feels this, and you've brought that into the whole organization, and taught the dreaded drama triangle and the empowerment triangle where they're creating their world, and that it's on the emotional maturity, right?
Yeah. But there is always a huge power inequity, and the fact that a survivor is likely to feel very grateful, very touched, and it's a hugely emotional relationship. Sure. So when that person looks at me as my boy, my girl, the impact on that on the survivor is huge. So
sure, you got to balance that with the corrective emotional experience as well.
Yeah. And the third difficulty is when very often in our work, in projects, we think of activities, but very often processes which will slow down the pace of the growth of that work is bypassed. Saying that, we need to get into action. We can't spend too much time on dealing with the mess. That becomes a huge barrier to building a relationship of cooperation, because people will not move at the same pace. They will require, and the larger the consortium, the more is the complexity as where pace is concerned. Yeah.
What models of collaboration have successfully centered survivor leadership, and what can we learn from them?
That has to be another session.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
There is a program called Leadership Next. I'd recommend, and maybe if there's another opportunity another time, I'm happy to talk about it in terms of what has led to a successful. This was a program that was run by more than 20 organizations across India, and they all tried it, doing in their own different ways. Some ways have worked better than others, but it's a whole new subject. I'll require more time to respond to that.
Lucy, can I have a question?
Sure. Yeah, can you use so that folks online?
I'm really excited to hear about the changes that are happening in India. In 2015, IJM invited Bloom to come to set up a training centre in Calcutta and Mumbai. And we literally approached every shelter there, and they said it won't work because the girls are in the shelter, they've got to be there, we can't get them training, they can't, and as soon as they get out, they go straight home. So that is absolutely brilliant. Are you saying that's changed now? Because we still have invitations to go there. So is it a different landscape? They also said none of them work together, and it's not like Cambodia.
So the old vanguard hasn't changed.
Okay.
But the time's up.
I love it.
Okay. Maybe last question. What strategies do you recommend for building emotional infrastructure on the front end of relationships so that connection is rooted in shared values, not just shared goals?
I can only talk about how we went through it. There may be plenty of other ways of doing it. I think self-work by people is super important. We use a technology called process work. Process work is about people building self-awareness in a collective setting through unstructured learning. Basically, if I am not reflexive enough to look at how am I feeling, what am I thinking, what's my patterns of behavior, what's my motivations, what's the pattern of my interpersonal relationships, what kind of role do I end to take up in any systems, what's my nature of power, hierarchy, dominance, submission. If I do not build more awareness about it, then it becomes extremely difficult to build that emotional infrastructure, which will constantly get caught in accusations and counter-accusations and defensiveness. That makes the system extremely highly anxious. So for anybody who's working in this kind of work, unless and until the person also looks at one's own inner self, building emotional infrastructure becomes very difficult.
Last 1 minute, so anything you want to say to wrap up?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And actually, it is not a question, but kind of like an observation. So thank you so much for sharing experience from India, and I'm thinking and try to see whether it fits with kind of like a Thailand context, or even kind of like whether it can apply to like other places. The topic is collaboration between donor, NGOs, and survivors, right? And you kind of like brought up so many issues that actually require more time for each issue. I think that government agencies are very important actors and are missing, right? And for kind of like a conflict that was brought up in some cases, actually, if we have something, even it is not called framework, if it is not called SOP or whatever, but if it is called like a principle, that if it is like a victim-centered approach, if we believe on that, there will be kind of only kind of like a working level conflict, because we are on the same goal. That is a victim-centered approach. And another thing is that the issue about the donors or the funders. I'm quite concerned of privacy of the victims. If we think about victim-centered approach, that privacy is important. So I'm not sure whether it is automatically or 100% that we need like donors in the room. That is one thing. Another thing is that not only that we need to advocate to change the system, the existing system or framework or legislation, but if the donor have indicators that withdrawal of the case is the indicator, I think that is like a problem already. So we need to advocate the funder as well. So that is my point. And if we have kind of like a victim-centered approach, right? In short term, we move people from harmful scene. In longer term, we advocate for domestic violence, that, hey, this is not acceptable, that a husband can do whatever with their wife, grooming is not acceptable, that kind of thing. So I think there are so many kind of mixed issues. And again, if we come back to Thailand, there are two things. There are, if they identify...
Ma'am, in the interest of time, I'm going to stop you over here. I thank you for sharing your opinion.
So the final word is that there is like a missing process from victims, because we talk about failure of victims, but then we talk about promoting like a leadership of survivors, but there are some like a missing process. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your opinion. All I can suggest to you is take the time to deliberate before rejecting it. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Just while I've got you and you're not at a desk and you're Well,